Ted Williams called himself the greatest hitter who ever lived. He was not bragging. He was stating a fact. He hit .344 for his career. He was the last man to bat .400. He had the highest on-base percentage in the history of baseball. He lost nearly 5 full seasons to 2 wars and still hit 521 home runs. Nobody humbled Ted Williams. Not Bob Feller, not Whitey Ford, not the entire pitching staff of the New York Yankees, not the Boston press corps that tormented him for 20 years. Williams studied hitting the way a physicist studies atoms. He could see the seams on a spinning baseball. He refused to swing at pitches that were a quarter inch off the plate. Umpires said he had the best eye they had ever seen. Nobody humbled Ted Williams, except for one man. Satchel Paige was not allowed in the major leagues until he was 42 years old. By then, his fastball was a memory. His arm had thrown an estimated 2,500 games. He had spent 20 years dominating the Negro Leagues, while the sport he loved refused to let him compete at the highest level because of the color of his skin. And when he finally got the chance to face Ted Williams, the greatest hitter who ever lived, batted .222 against him. This is the story of the splendid splinter and the man who made him swing and miss. Theodore Samuel Williams was born on August 30th, 1918 in San Diego, California. His father Samuel was a photographer and a drifter who was rarely home. His mother May was a Salvation Army volunteer who spent most of her time doing charity work on the streets of San Diego, often leaving young Ted and his brother Danny to fend for themselves. The neighborhood kids called her Salvation May. Ted grew up essentially on his own. He spent his afternoons at the North Park playground, hitting baseballs until the sun went down. When the playground closed, he walked to a nearby park and swung at imaginary pitches under the streetlights. He was obsessed. He was consumed. From the time he was 8 years old, Ted Williams wanted one thing: to walk down the street and have people say, "There goes the greatest hitter who ever lived." He was not interested in fielding. He was not interested in base running. He was not interested in anything that did not involve a bat and a ball. His single-mindedness bordered on pathological. While other kids played football and chased girls, Ted Williams stood in front of a mirror and practiced his swing, adjusting his grip, shifting his weight, studying the mechanics of the stroke the way other teenagers studied algebra. He attended Herbert Hoover High School in San Diego, where he batted over .400 as a junior and senior while also pitching. The San Diego Padres of the Pacific Coast League signed him at 17. The Boston Red Sox purchased his contract in 1938, and in 1939, at age 20, Ted Williams arrived in the major leagues. He was immediately, insufferably, magnificently great. In his rookie season, he hit .327, with 31 home runs and 145 runs batted in, leading the American League in RBI. He walked 107 times because pitchers were already afraid to throw him strikes. He was tall and thin, 6'3" and 175 pounds, with long arms and a whip-quick swing that generated extraordinary bat speed from a compact, efficient motion. Veteran players watched him take batting practice and shook their heads. They had never seen anyone study hitting with such intensity. Williams would stand in the cage for an hour, making micro-adjustments to his stance between every swing, analyzing the trajectory of each ball, cataloging the results in a mental database that he would carry for the rest of his career. In 1941, Williams hit .406. It was the last time any player in Major League Baseball hit .400 in a single season. On the final day, he was batting .399.5, which would have been rounded up to .400. His manager, Joe Cronin, offered to let him sit out the doubleheader and preserve the mark. Williams refused. "I do not want to back into this," he said. He played both games and went 6 for 8, finishing at .406. He went out and earned it because that was who he was. He won the Triple Crown in 1942, leading the American League in batting average at .356, home runs with 36, and runs batted in with 137. It was the single greatest offensive season of the 1940s. Then he left. He enlisted as a Marine aviator and spent 3 years learning to fly, training other pilots, and serving the country while his baseball career sat in a drawer. He missed the 1943, 44, and 45 seasons entirely. When he returned in 1946, he had not faced live pitching in over 3 years. It did not matter. He hit .342 with 38 home runs and won the American League MVP. The greatest hitter in baseball had lost 3 years and come back as if he had never left. He won a second Triple Crown in 1947, hitting .343 with 32 home runs and 114 runs batted in. But the MVP voters gave the award to Joe DiMaggio, who hit .315 with 20 home runs. One writer left Williams off his ballot entirely. The snub became one of the most controversial MVP votes in baseball history and fueled Williams's lifelong hostility toward the Boston press corps. Then the military called again. In 1952, the Korean War took Williams away from baseball for a second time. He was 33 years old. He had already given 3 years of his prime to World War II. Now the Marines wanted 2 more. Williams flew 39 combat missions in Korea as a fighter pilot, including one in February of 1953 when his F-9F Panther jet was hit by enemy ground fire. The hydraulic system failed. The landing gear would not deploy. The plane caught fire. Williams had to fly the burning aircraft back to base at 200 miles per hour and make an emergency belly landing on the runway. The plane skidded across the tarmac, trailing flames. He climbed out of the cockpit and walked away. His wingman that day was future astronaut and Senator John Glenn, who later said that Williams was one of the bravest men he had ever known. When Williams came back to baseball in August of 1953, he had missed the equivalent of nearly 5 full seasons across 2 wars. He was 34 years old. His body had been battered by combat and the physical toll of military training. Most athletes would have been finished. Williams hit .345 at age 38. He hit .328 at age 40. In his final at-bat on September 28, 1960, at age 41, he hit a home run off Jack Fisher of the Baltimore Orioles. The ball sailed into the right field bullpen at Fenway Park. He rounded the bases and jogged into the dugout without tipping his cap, because Ted Williams never tipped his cap. Not once. Not ever. John Updike, who was in the press box that day, wrote a famous essay about the moment and concluded, "Gods do not answer letters." He retired with a .344 career batting average, 521 home runs, and an on-base percentage of .482, the highest in baseball history. His 20/10 vision was so sharp that he claimed he could see the ball flatten against the bat at the point of contact. Umpires confirmed that he almost never swung at a ball outside the strike zone. He struck out only once per 9.6 at bats, the best strikeout rate of any power hitter in history. He wrote a book called The Science of Hitting that remains the definitive work on batting technique 6 decades after its publication. He treated hitting like a graduate-level course and expected everyone around him to take it just as seriously. He was arrogant, he was combative, he was the most disciplined batter who ever stepped into a box. Nobody humbled Ted Williams. The numbers prove it. A .344 career average, .406 in a single season, the highest on-base percentage ever recorded. The man who called himself the greatest hitter who ever lived had the statistics to back it up. Then he faced Satchel Paige, Leroy. Robert Paige was born on July 7, 1906, in Mobile, Alabama. His family was so poor that his mother put cardboard in her shoes to cover the holes. Young Leroy earned pocket money carrying luggage at the train station, rigging a pole and rope contraption that let him haul 4 satchels at once. A friend looked at the contraption and said, "You look like a satchel tree." The nickname stuck. At 12, Paige was arrested for shoplifting and spent 5 years at the Industrial School for Negro Children in Mount Meigs, Alabama. It was there that a coach taught him to pitch. Paige later said, You might say I traded 5 years of freedom to learn how to pitch. He entered the Negro Leagues in 1927 with the Birmingham Black Barons. By 1930, he was the most famous black athlete in America. By 1933, he was untouchable. That year, he pitched 64 consecutive scoreless innings, compiled a 31-4 record, and won 21 games in a row. The numbers were staggering, even by the inflated standards of Negro League competition, where the best players faced each other with a frequency that made every game feel like a playoff. His fastball was overpowering. Hitters described it as a blur, a bullet, a white dot that arrived at the plate before their brains could send the signal to swing. He threw sidearm, three-quarters, overhand, and from every angle in between. He was 6'4" and 180 pounds, all arms and legs and joints, and the ball came out of a whipping, slinging motion that made it seem like it was being launched from a catapult rather than thrown by a human hand. He named his pitches like characters in a story. The B-ball, because it would be where he wanted it to be. The bat dodger, because it dodged bats. The hesitation pitch, where he would pause mid-delivery and freeze hitters in their stance. The midnight rider, long Tom, little Tom. Each pitch had a personality. Each pitch had a purpose. And hitters had no idea which one was coming. He would call his outfielders in and have them sit on the infield grass behind the mound. Then he would strike out the side with 9 pitches. He set a matchbox on home plate and threw pitch after pitch directly over it. He hammered nails into boards with fastballs thrown from 60 feet away. He stood at the center field wall and threw a rope to home plate on the fly, 427 feet through the air. He once threw a pitch through a 4-inch hole cut in a wooden fence. Everything about Satchel Paige was larger than life, and the remarkable thing is that most of it was documented. Dizzy Dean faced him in barnstorming exhibitions and declared, "My fastball looks like a change of pace next to that little pistol bullet Satchel shoots up to the plate." Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, called Paige the best and fastest pitcher he had ever faced. Bob Feller, who barnstormed against Paige annually starting in 1937, confirmed it years later. Nobody stopped Joe DiMaggio as cold as Satchel Paige did. DiMaggio hit .342 with 11 home runs off Feller. Against Paige, he went 0 for 8 with 3 strikeouts. Think about that. DiMaggio, one of the 5 greatest hitters in history, could not buy a hit off Satchel Paige. And Paige was not allowed in the major leagues because of the color of his skin. The gentleman's agreement, the unwritten understanding between owners and players that kept black athletes out of organized baseball, lasted from 1887 to 1945. For 58 years, the greatest athletes in America were told they could not compete at the highest level because of how they looked. It was not a rule written in any rule book. It was not a law passed by any legislature. It was simply an understanding among white men that black men were not welcome. And everyone went along with it. Satchel Paige pitched for 2 decades in the Negro Leagues, dominating every hitter he faced, drawing tens of thousands of fans to exhibition games, and being told over and over again that he was the greatest pitcher anyone had ever seen, but could not pitch where it counted. They said I was the greatest pitcher they ever saw, Paige told reporters years later. I could not understand why they could not give me no justice. In 1947, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers. The door was open. But Paige was 41 years old. His prime had been stolen. The fastball that had terrorized hitters for 20 years was no longer quite as fast. The arm that had thrown an estimated 2,500 games was no longer quite as strong. Bill Vick, the maverick owner of the Cleveland Indians, signed Paige in July of 1948. He was 42 years old, the oldest rookie in Major League history. The Sporting News, the most influential publication in baseball, called the signing a travesty. They said it demeaned baseball's standards. They said Vick was running a circus, turning the major leagues into a sideshow to sell tickets. Vick's response was blunt. The real farce was keeping him out for 20 years because of racism. Paige responded by going 6-1 with a 2.48 earned run average in 72 2/3 innings. He drew 72,000 fans to one game in Cleveland, the largest crowd for a night game in American League history at the time. He threw 2 shutouts, the first a complete game 5-0 whitewash of the Chicago White Sox. He helped the Indians win the World Series, their first championship since 1920. The man who had been called too old, too black, and too much of a circus act had won a World Series ring in his first year. The critics had nothing left to say. Paige pitched for the Indians again in 1949, then joined the St. Louis Browns in '51 when Vake bought that franchise. He made the All-Star team at age 46. He pitched 3 scoreless innings for the Kansas City Athletics at 59 years old in 1965. The only hit he allowed coming from Carl Yastrzemski, who was 25 at the time. He had pitched across 5 decades. 5. No other player in history had ever done that. From the late 20s to the mid-60s, Satchel Paige was still standing on a mound somewhere, still throwing, still proving that the 20 years they stole from him had not broken him. Ted Williams knew all of this. He knew Paige's history. He knew the injustice. He knew that the man standing on the mound against him had been the most dominant pitcher in baseball for 2 decades and had been denied his rightful place because of racism. Williams was many things: arrogant, stubborn, combative, but he was not blind to injustice. And when Williams stepped in against Paige, the greatest hitter who ever lived, could not hit him. In 11 career plate appearances against Paige in the major leagues, Williams collected 2 hits in 9 at-bats, a batting average of .222. He drew 2 walks. Against every other pitcher in the American League, Williams hit .344. Against Satchel Paige, he hit 122 points lower. 122 points. That is not a gap. That is a canyon. That is the widest drop between a great hitter's career average and his average against a single pitcher in the history of baseball. For context, Walter Johnson reduced Babe Ruth by 50 points from .342 to .292. That was considered one of the most impressive pitcher versus hitter matchups in baseball history. Paige dropped Williams more than double that amount, 122 points. Against the most disciplined, most scientific, most physically gifted hitter the sport has ever produced. Williams struck out only once per 9.6 at-bats across his career, the best strikeout rate among power hitters in history. He had 20/10 vision. He could see the rotation on a curveball before it left the pitcher's hand. He refused to chase pitches that were a fraction of an inch outside the strike zone. Umpires confirmed that Williams called balls and strikes more accurately than they did. And Satchel Paige struck him out on a change-up that Williams did not even recognize until it was in the catcher's mitt. The most famous of their encounters came on September 14, 1951, at Fenway Park. Williams and the Red Sox were hosting the St. Louis Browns. It was a meaningless game in September between a mediocre Red Sox team and a terrible Browns team, but when Paige entered the game in the bottom of the 8th inning as a relief pitcher, the at-bat became anything but meaningless. After retiring Johnny Pesky on a routine ground-out, Paige prepared to face Williams. The Fenway crowd leaned forward. Every fan in the park knew what they were watching: the greatest hitter alive against the greatest pitcher they had ever heard of. Paige worked quickly. He reached 2 strikes before Williams could settle into his stance. Williams stood in the box, his legendary eyes locked on Paige's release point, his body coiled, his bat cocked at precisely the angle described in his book. Every instinct he had, every hour of study, every 1,000 swings in the batting cage told him the same thing: the fastball is coming. Paige threw a changeup. The ball floated toward the plate at a speed that was 10 or 15 miles per hour slower than Williams expected. His timing was destroyed. His front foot was committed. His hands were already firing. The bat came through the zone and found nothing but air. Strike 3. Ted Williams, the man with the greatest eye in baseball history, had been fooled by a 45-year-old man with a tired arm and a pitch that arrived at the plate with the urgency of a Sunday stroll. Williams was furious. He had gone 2 for 5 in the game with a home run earlier, so the strikeout was not devastating to his statistics. But it was devastating to his pride. He was so angry that he scrawled Paige's name on the barrel of the bat he had been using. That bat is now in the collection at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, one of the most remarkable artifacts in the museum. A piece of wood that tells the story of a strikeout that meant more than any home run ever could. A reminder that even the greatest hitter who ever lived could be humbled by a man who should have been in the major leagues 20 years earlier. But here is what separates the Ted Williams and Satchel Paige story from every other rivalry in baseball history. Ted Williams did not just acknowledge that Paige was great. He did something about it. On July 25, 1966, Ted Williams stood at the podium in Cooperstown, New York, to deliver his Baseball Hall of Fame induction speech. He had been voted in on his first ballot with 93.4% of the vote. He was one of the most celebrated athletes in American history. The ceremony was being broadcast on radio across the country. The crowd was there to honor him, to celebrate his career, to listen to the greatest hitter who ever lived, reflect on 2 decades of greatness. Williams thanked his coaches. He praised the minor league managers who had worked with him as a teenager. He talked about hard work and the dedication required to master the art of hitting. He thanked the fans of Boston, even though he had spent 20 years at war with them, refusing to tip his cap, feuding with the press, and treating adoration like an invasion of his privacy. He acknowledged that the relationship had been complicated. That was as close to an apology as Ted Williams ever got. Then he said something that nobody in that crowd expected to hear, something that no white Hall of Famer had ever said in the history of the institution. Something that changed the conversation about baseball's past forever. I hope that someday the names of Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson in some way can be added as a symbol of the great Negro players that are not here only because they... The ceremony took place on August 9, 1971, in Cooperstown. 2,500, mostly white spectators gathered on a gloriously sunny day to watch a 65-year-old man from Mobile, Alabama, receive the honor that should have come decades earlier. But the ceremony was not without controversy. The Hall of Fame had initially announced that Paige's plaque would hang in a separate wing, apart from the other inductees, designated specifically for Negro League players. The implication was devastating. Even in Cooperstown, even in the building that was supposed to celebrate the best of baseball, segregation would persist. The man who had been kept out of the major leagues because of his race would now be kept out of the main room because of his race. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Sports writers condemned the decision in columns across the country. Players spoke out. Commissioner Bowie Kuhn, recognizing the public relations disaster, reversed the decision. Paige's plaque was placed alongside every other Hall of Famer in the main gallery where it belonged, where it had always belonged. Paige stood at the podium and delivered a speech that was vintage Satchel, witty, charming, and quietly devastating in ways the audience did not fully appreciate. "Since I have been here, I have been called some very nice names," he began. "And I can remember when some of the men here called me some bad names when I used to pitch against them." The crowd laughed, but Paige was not joking. He was reminding them gently of something they would rather forget. That many of the men whose plaques hung inside that building had refused to play alongside him. That the institution now honoring him had excluded him for decades. That the nice names were new. The bad names were old. "I am the proudest man on earth today," Paige concluded. And he meant it. Despite everything, despite the 20 years of exclusion, despite the separate wing controversy, despite the bad names, Satchel Paige was proud to be in Cooperstown. Because he knew he belonged there. He had always known. The story of Ted Williams and Satchel Paige is not a story about strikeouts or batting averages, or even about the gap between 222 and 344. It is a story about two men who had their careers stolen by forces beyond their control, who understood what that theft meant, and who responded to it in ways that revealed their deepest character. Williams lost nearly 5 full seasons to 2 wars. He served as a Marine fighter pilot in World War II and Korea, flying a combined 80 combat missions, getting shot down once, crash-landing a burning jet, and walking away without complaint. He came back both times and resumed being the greatest hitter who ever lived, as if nothing had happened. His estimated career statistics, adjusted for the seasons he missed, project to approximately 680 home runs, over 2,500 runs batted in, and a career that would have placed him unambiguously as the greatest offensive player in history. The wars took those numbers from him. He never complained about it. He served because he believed it was his duty. Paige lost 20 years to racism. Not 5, 20. He was kept out of the major leagues from the time he entered professional baseball in 1927 until 1948. Those were not just any 20 years. They were the prime of his career, the years between 21 and 42. The years when his fastball was at its fastest, his arm at its strongest, his repertoire at its most devastating. The years when he was striking out entire lineups in barnstorming exhibitions and throwing 55 no-hitters and winning an estimated 2,000 games across the Negro Leagues. What would Paige's major league statistics look like if he had been allowed to pitch from 1927 onward? Nobody knows. But consider this. He went 6-1 with a 2.48 ERA at age 42, when his fastball was a shadow of what it had been. He made the All-Star team at 46. He threw 3 scoreless innings at 59. If he could do that in his 40s and 50s, what could he have done in his 20s and 30s? Both men were denied their full careers, but Williams received immediate recognition. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1966 on his first ballot. The world knew his name. The world celebrated his achievements. Paige had to wait until 1971, and even then they tried to put him in a separate room, as if segregation should follow a man even into immortality. Williams understood the unfairness. He understood it not because someone explained it to him, but because he had experienced his own version of it. He knew what it felt like to have years taken away. He knew what it felt like to come back and prove that you still belonged. And he knew that Paige had endured something far worse, for far longer, with far less recognition, and with far more grace than Williams himself had ever shown. That is why he used his Hall of Fame speech to say their names: Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, the great Negro players who were not here only because they were not given a chance. Ted Williams hit 344 for his career. Against Satchel Paige, he hit 222. The gap between those two numbers is 122 points, the widest between any elite hitter and any single pitcher in the history of the sport. But the real gap was not about batting average. The real gap was about justice. Williams had everything the game could offer: fame, records, a Hall of Fame plaque, the adoration of millions. Paige had his talent stolen for 20 years and then was almost put in a separate room when they finally let him into Cooperstown. Williams saw that gap, and he tried to close it. The greatest hitter who ever lived was humbled twice by Satchel Paige. Once on the field, where a changeup made him look foolish, and once in his soul, where the injustice of Paige's exclusion made him realize that being the greatest hitter who ever lived meant nothing if the greatest pitcher who ever lived could not even get through the door. Ted Williams never tipped his cap to the fans. He never showed emotion on the field. He never admitted weakness to anyone. But on July 25, 1966, he stood at a podium in Cooperstown and tipped his cap to Satchel Paige. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. That was the moment Ted Williams was humbled. Not by a fastball, not by a change-up, by the truth. And the truth was that the greatest pitcher he ever faced had been denied 20 years of his career because of the color of his skin. And nobody had done a damn thing about it until Ted Williams stood up and said their names. Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, the great Negro players. Ted Williams said their names, and baseball finally listened. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.